I muted myself. Hello, everyone. Welcome to it's another Discipline Deep Dive. We do these on the regular now, so I'm sure you're all old hats at how this works. But just in case you're not, just in case you've decided to join us at this, the near finishing line of the 2024 lineup of Discipline Deep Dive events. Hello, I'm Jonas. I'm the Community and Events Lead at Into Games. If this is your first time hearing about Into Games, you're like, Jonas, what is Into Games? I'll tell you. Into Games is an organisation. We're based in the UK. We're a charity set up to help and support people from low income or under-resourced backgrounds get their foot in the door when it comes to a career in the games industry, recognising that social mobility in the games industry is, when compared to many other industries around it, especially creative industries, just pretty bloody bad. So we kind of work on that by looking at people in education who might traditionally not have access to certain resources or the ability to go on to full-time education in games-related courses, and trying to help fund that or provide bursaries or provide alternative means of education and alternative pathways into the games industry. One such way that we do that, for example, is an event like this, where we can look a little bit at the games industry, we can look a little bit at entry-level careers in the games industry, and we can say, well, wait a second, what do you need to get that entry-level career? Like, what is expected of you as an applicant to start your first job in the games industry? And for each one of those skills, or for every answer that we think we would get, we will then kind of turn that into a talk or an event. If you're quite interested in knowing a little bit more about entry-level opportunities in the games industry, you can check out this little website that we teamed up with some other people, lovely people called Bird's Eye View, to make. It's called the Entry Level Skills Hub, and you can go to entrylevel.games, entrylevel.games, and that just has a list of like common entry-level positions in the games industry, and like common, or at least quite sort of averaged out, I suppose is the phrase I'm looking for, but requirements that a lot of those entry-level jobs will ask you for. Also has examples of different tools or softwares that you might need to know for that job. Also has examples of portfolios and CVs of people who actually went into those jobs quite recently, so you can see what a recent successful candidate looks like. In particular, today we're going to be talking about production. So if you're going into an entry-level producer role, like an associate producer or something along those lines, what are the kind of skills that you might need for that? And in particular, today's skill is going to be in communication, but I'm not going to demonstrate my communication skills to you, because that would be 2 hours of me talking about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, the anime. So to bring you someone who won't do that, I bring onto the stage Nia. Hello, Nia. How's it going?
It's very well, thank you. Yes.
Brilliant stuff. I'm an admirer of your posters. Like, I'm liking
Thank
the
you.
Wonder Woman, but I'm also liking, like, what I can tell is not. Like, it's covered up by a lovely pig with a Christmas hat. It's very festive.
Yeah, we did a Game Informer cover for Dead Island 2, so which I was also proud of. But yeah, the piglet's from House, one of our DLCs, and I decided to make him festive because that's what we do. It's easier. Thinking about what's behind you when you're remote working is really tricky.
This is so I've got the blur on, but it's only because my background's really busy, and I think it's distracting. Like, I've got a little on-air sign. I like, if I use my hand, I can almost hint to what's behind me. But we're getting way off base there. So hello everyone in the audience. Thanks for joining us today. So Nia, you're going to talk a little bit about sort of production and communication.
Yes.
In that, so what I'm going to do, everyone, is I am not the expert on this subject, so I'm going to give Nia. I'm going to give you your slides. I'm going to put you up here. And I'm going to say to the audience, please, everyone, please give a warm digital round of applause here to Nia, who's going to be talking about effective communication strategies for game development. That's the title of the talk. And then if you have any questions in chat, please do just hold on to them. Just hold them tight. Put a lid on them. Keep them safe. In about 30, 45 minutes or somewhere towards the hour. If we've got time, we can sit and do a bit of a Q&A. So then pop all your questions in chat in that time. And if nothing else as well, you can check out if anything doesn't get answered, or you're like, I want answers to this now, don't hesitate to run into the Intergames Discord, where you'll find links to all of these things somewhere in the YouTube description or on our LinkedIn, and from there you can start poking questions, or you can see maybe if your question has been answered in the past. The round of applauses in chat are truly glorious. Thank you, everyone. Nia, I leave them to you. Good luck.
Thank you very much. So yeah, as Jenna said, my name is Nia. I'm a producer at Dambuster Studios, and I was really excited to see that they were asking for someone to talk about communication. So communication is something I love, and it's probably one of my favorite things about being a producer is one I get to talk to lots of people. So talking to people who want to be producers or interested in communication skills. I should point out this is not just a producer thing. This is everyone should know about communication skills. So who am I? Why am I talking to you? So I work on Dambuster Studios. So we did Dead Island 2, and recently it's 2 DLCs. So House and Solar. That's me from a summer party. I'm also, I'll mention this, I'm part of the entertainments committee, which is one of my favorite sub roles in the studio. But before that, I spent 15 years in game design academia. So I taught pretty much everything at one point. I did a lot of research and writing about running games jams, and games jams are fantastic. They're also these little microcosms of game production and pipelines. So, and also communication skills. If you've been up for 24 hours and your communication skills are completely sort of gone, they're really interesting in how you produce stuff, but also how you learn to communicate with teams. So I'm really interested in team dynamics and the communication that I've helped thousands of students with employability skills and portfolios. I really love looking at sort of CVs and thinking about how you are communicating, what skills you have and how you answer things and how you work with that. But obviously games academia means that's it's meetings, it is presentations, it is conferences, it is I've tried to work out how much of my time I must have spent talking to people in one forum or another in different audiences, or I'd loved open days. I did a lot of sort of leaping around and sort of sales stuff. So there was a lot of communicating and a lot of writing and a lot of feedback, all of that sort of rolled into that. Anyway, so I spent 15 years doing that, and then I decided to move into what I'd always wanted to do, which was production. So I taught stuff about production. I have masters, and when I did my masters, I particularly loved. I was producer for our team course of course, games, and I made a lot of cakes to make people happy, and people worked better because I'd made them cakes, which is something I still do. So now I am Dambuster's narrative, audio, and dialogue producer. So that's working with obviously the narrative and the audio teams, and then also dialogues are sort of the bridge in between them. So that was about 3 years ago. I leapt into that. So coming in as Dead Island 2 was kind of finishing up. I'm a line manager still. Once you have those skills, they never leave. And that's great. I love line managing. I love having those sort of connection and building up with the team. That's mainly the narrative team, but I was a studio committee member. So I mentioned the entertainment committee, particularly because Dambuster is already a fantastic place to work, but thinking about how we can make it a fantastic place to work as a remote worker. So yeah, that's fantastic. I care a lot about information architecture. So when I'm talking about communication, I'm also talking about written communication as well as sort of physical and verbal communication. And I really, how we organize, how we have all the information about things for all the sort of different things and elements we're looking at. I think that's a really key thing because it fits into the same sphere. It's not one skill. Communication kind of fits in all these different elements. And like I said, I'm a remote worker. So I do go into the studio. We have a lovely studio just in the centre of Nottingham near the train station. I go in if there's a party or if there's team building or if there's something else. We actually have an interesting hybrid sort of approach. We've got sort of a spread of people while also having some people in the studio that kind of waxes and wanes as we need stuff. That in itself is communication, really interesting communication, things that thrown up from people being in the studio and actually or not being in the studio. And there's a load of stuff that we're really interested in production on how we make sure our hybrid spaces work for people and doing all right. So that's me. That's what I did, and that's what I do now, and all these skills kind of fit together. So I was delighted to see the opportunity to sort of talk about production and communication. So everything I do hinges on clear communication. So that's for my different teams, and they sort of work in different ways as well, in different ways throughout the day. And I'll talk a little bit about the day and what can I do. Different audiences. So obviously I'm talking to however many people here and what kind of skills you have. But if I talk to our leadership versus maybe the directorate, maybe our lower, the narrative team, it's different audiences. Over different tools and methods. And I think that's, again, quite interesting, even within our studio. And I'll talk again a little bit about this later on, but the different kind of tools we have and ways that we communicate, different outcomes and different needs. So what we kind of need as the end goal from the communication. Think a lot about sort of, again, the audience that we're writing or trying to communicate anything for, and to the outside world. And this is a really interesting one because I spend a lot of time explaining to people what I do now, which is really interesting because game development is still very sort of obscure to people, and it changes obviously from studio to studio or different elements of the industry. So what I do as a producer may not be the same as someone else who has exactly the same title at a different studio, but the communication skills are going to be running the same. So the different kind of methods that I use as well to kind of keep track of things. I've also been thinking a lot about bees. So immediately, if someone talks to me about communication, I think about bees. Bees are fantastic communicators, but they do a lot of stuff by dance. And I'm not going to talk about making you do dance, but I think I also spend a lot of time thinking about birds and how birds find bird feeders, because that's a pet project in our garden. But yeah, so you'll see a lot of stuff about bees, but they are, like I said, phenomenal communicators. And I also think sometimes that we're very busy worker bees. In production, I always feel like we're sort of everywhere and in the middle of this sort of hive of activity. So bees are very close to my heart. So a little buzzy bee will be popping up all the way through. You'll also notice this is a very stripped down presentation. So when I thought about how and who I was presenting to, what I wanted to make sure was actually it wasn't loads of whizzy pictures and stuff, because what I wanted to be was very clear in the messages I was talking to. So the reasoning behind this, just in case anyone thinks I'm not capable of making a shiny, pretty presentation, I am, but there's a reasons. And this is part of it, thinking about how you want to communicate something. So what do I do day to day as a producer? So like I said, I'm a producer, and I've been a producer at Dambuster for about 3 years. And mainly I organize and unblock the creatives so they can make the game, which isn't to say I'm not creative myself, but I know my place as a producer. Sounds a bit weird, but I work with, like I said, the audio and the narrative teams, and then dialogue spreads between both of those. I'm not there to be writing dialogue, or I wrote one journal once and it was very exciting. And that was a real honor, but that's not what I'm there for. I'm there to work out how I can make sure my creatives, and it's definite, creative production is very different from, say, technical production in the way that you maybe are generating tasks or how you're writing in those information. But yeah, I work with these fantastic creative teams. They work in different ways. They've got different things that they're very interested in. They have different ways that they communicate out as well. So I have to account how I deal with those, how I deal with them collectively, and then also the sort of the leadership and the directorate around that. I need to know the right person in the studio to ask. So if one of my team have got a problem or a question or a blockage, it's kind of up to me to work out who to ask and how to get that information and how to get that unblocked. So I need to talk to a lot of people. I need to get to know a lot of people. I need to know what their actual jobs are beyond just a title. I need to know who's working on, say, a different feature or a different element or within a different team. And now, as it is, production, we have a 14-strong production team in Dambuster. So actually the usual sort of core place is someone asks in production, who is doing this, or who do I need to include in this? And that again, but it's knowing the right person and then approaching those and working out how you sort of voice, like, oh, my team have got this problem, and then be able to go back with an answer, hopefully. Or if not, working out how we get to whatever unblocks or whatever sorts that out, or whatever information. So there's a lot of information gathering. There's a lot of kind of back channels and chatting through things, because what I want is my team to be able to work without this hindrance. I'm the person who connects people. I'm the person who knows this kind of thing. That's me. It's problem solving every day. That's great. If you like problem solving, then production is probably what will make you happiest. So, and as a production team, what we're interested in is the best ways to keep and get our teams working. And as I said, hybrid is a really interesting aspect to this, but we're looking at how we plan ahead. We're looking at how we can manage the time for our teams, and how we can look at sort of the project and scope and all of the work around that, how we can do process planning. We spend a lot of time talking about processing and processes, and we've done an awful lot of stuff on pipelines at the moment, because things have moved on since we last did all of this. So we're spending quite a lot of time now looking at actually how long did it take to do that, and who do we need to involve, and all these kind of things. It's a lot of whiteboards and mirror boards. And like I said, I sit on the entertainment committee. We have our Christmas party tomorrow, which is why it's very much in my mind. But that's communicating out to people who I would never usually have to talk to, because that's, whole studio-wide communications. Which in itself is always terrifying, but also great when you suddenly see the response elsewhere. So like I said, day to day as a producer, different kinds of communications, different methods of communications, different things I have to think about. I've split this into a couple of parts, as was suggested, and I'm always happy to go with suggestions, because that means someone else has thought about the best ways to communicate out things. So effective communication. And like I said, it's beyond just talking, but production is a people-facing role. And if you're in production and you're not talking to people all the day, then you might need to sort of reconsider this. Or if you don't particularly like people, again, you may want to consider this. Definitely for me, it's people-facing. It is on camera. It's meeting heavy. Production is incredibly meeting heavy, because we're the ones meeting with everyone. And then it's sort of working out how you then present that findings for things, or where that's ending up in written communication. So it's balancing both of those things. So last week I counted 47 meetings in my calendar. Lots of them are very short, which is lovely. When I was in academia, lots of meetings were very long. So production certainly Game Dev has a lot of short meetings. That's maybe 15 minutes here. That's maybe 15 minutes on that. That's maybe a scrum here. It may be a half hour. It might be some of them finish early. That's all great. But that is also then a lot of what I think of as code switching. So what you don't get is a long tract of like, well, I'm going to spend all day tidying up wiki pages, which is the happy thing for me to be doing. So it's a lot of sort of running between different things in your brain. And I'll talk about some of the methods I keep track of that. So some of those meetings I ran, as the producer, or it might be the area that I'm interested or I'm in charge of. We all have sort of different areas of responsibilities. So some of those I'm in charge of. So I might be, I'll have set forward some minutes, or I'll preface the start of the meeting. And meeting hygiene, as we call it, is a really important thing. So everyone coming to a meeting should know what is going to be about and what is going to be there. Some of them I took lots of notes on. Some of them I didn't need to take quite so many notes on because they were sort of larger scale things. We actually have little iBot sits in and takes some information and takes notes for us as well, which has revolutionized production. Some were presentations, others were one-to-ones. So some were bigger things, one was a whole studio wide thing. We have one of those every month. So information communicated out to the entire studio. Other ones, like I said, were one-to-ones, both with the people that I line manage and then with my line manager. And then there was a few sort of that popped up during the week. We try not to put meetings in the same week. We try to give people a chance to work around them. Some were just in my teams, and obviously I've been there 3 years. I know my teams pretty well. Others were made up of people from lots of different teams. And then some of those people I may not know quite so well. So that's a lot of different, like I said, different switching between elements, of different thinking about how you communicate, different sort of presenting. I tend to keep my camera on. It's very rare for me to keep my camera off, just because it helps me be sort of in the zone and there. Yes, and a lot having to be present. So when we're talking about communication, and I'll talk on, but we write stuff up and stuff are correlated onto, we use Confluence a lot, or we use Jira tasks. So you've got to think about how you are writing specifically what needs to go into a Jira task for someone else for it to make sense. But it's worth just pointing out that communication is not just these sort of speaking meetings and it's writing things up. It's paying attention on camera if your camera's on. And sometimes you don't want your camera on, and sometimes it's too big a meeting that cameras are distracting. Or if you happen to know it's a meeting that you're like, well, I need this on in the background, but I'm going to do something else, then we pick and choose where we don't need our cameras on. But it's paying attention, and it's making sure. And sometimes people have I've got a different screen here, but I'll try where I can to make sure that I'm looking at my camera on my laptop, so that I'm directly looking at people. That's how I communicate, and that's how I like to make sure I'm present. Sometimes it is communication. We have sort of chat things and stuff, and it's using the right GIFs or emojis where appropriate. So we have some channels that allow GIFs, some channels that don't. We have different disciplines on different sort of communication things. Some things are more some things are more formal, some are semi-formal, some are social channels. But it's also, these are all forms of communication, and this is getting to know people in the studio as well. So we don't talk a lot about sort of team building and social channels, but that means that you're building up a knowledge of who was in the studio and who else really cares about, I don't know, Lego as much as, say, I do, and the new social Lego channel is quite fun. So, but it's using those kind of things, and I didn't realize how much of my life I'd spend trying to find the right emojis and the right GIFs for things where it's needed. But sometimes that can communicate more than just the words. It's keeping an eye on chat. So one of the things we've certainly found is that most of the stuff we do is over Teams, and that's, camera on, chatting, and when what sort of happens at the side is this sidebar chat, and sometimes that's relevant and sometimes that's less relevant, and it's quite tricky sometimes to keep an eye on that, to go we're in a, like, oh, that's a useful link, oh, actually that's a joke someone's put in, that kind of stuff, and actually being able to look at that. And that's sometimes a bit distracting, and sometimes we might call a stop to that if it's getting too distracting. But that's an interesting one. And then also we have chat channels, so that we had a meeting with some external people, and then suddenly I had a chat through our chat system of like almost like a back channel, and we have this in other things when we're doing, say, video recording and stuff. So you might be sort of typing it to someone else while you're talking and while you're keeping time. So there's a lot of keeping track of things. You may not always want to necessarily have all those sort of front and center in your face, for example, but yeah, so communication is not just written, and it's not just the speaking bit. And I like the speaking bit. Like I said, I like talking to people, and I enjoy this, but sometimes even certainly by, say, the end of the day, or by your 13th meeting in a day, you're a bit like, I am done with this, or I cannot take another subject, or actually I might have to just take an hour, I'm just doing admin. I particularly like Friday afternoon data entry tasks. So anyone knows to give me those, because that's a sort of nice, quiet, that's when you need to recharge. And it is draining, this kind of being on, being that sort of being around, being involved with all these different teams, all these different elements you might need to consider can be draining. And so if you can find ways to switch off, Dambusters is great at enforcing sort of actually switching off and having time out, which is, it's, like I said, glorious. So and also bear in mind that every sort of studio, there's loads of different pipelines, loads of different specialities, and game development is such a complex sort of machine of things, and these specific roles filled by brilliant people across the board. And every studio and sort of every project, like, it's going to feature, everything's going to be different. So what you may use for one team, or what you may have used in one studio, what you may have used in one situation, may not carry across exactly to another team or another situation. And I think that's a really important thing to remember with communication, is you might have to change things, and you might have to change how you communicate as you go through different studios, or as you go through different teams, even within a studio, because there's different kind of rules and different kind of elements. I sat in on one of my production colleagues' things. We were looking at a different production methodology, and come to my stand-in, and I was, it says it's in a room. And she was like, oh yeah, no, they all go into a room. So I'm the time I've been doing this job, I think I've had 2 actual in-person stand-ups. Everything else has been like, I've had in-person meetings occasionally, but generally everything has been hybrid or on Teams. And even if you're in the studio, then that mix is there. So like I said, you might have these different kind of things even within the same studio, and how you might need to adapt. You might need to have different, almost like communication skill sets for different areas. And your role as producers, like I said, is to find ways to make sure all those teams and individuals understand each other and work towards a common goal. It's not there to do the job for them. I mean, the technical things that my colleagues do, I can't do that. But what I can make sure is that everyone knows what they're talking about, and everyone knows from a baseline that they know where to go for information. So like I said, with the information architecture role that I take on is really interesting, because how do you design a space that Dambuster, about a couple of hundreds, 200 of people can find the relevant information and know what's updated and know what's up to date and know what isn't? Where can they find all this information and keep it up, keep that going? So that in itself is sort of communication elements. But yeah, so there might be a whole load of different communication skills that you need to employ at different times for different reasons, and that might change throughout the day, or as you talk to different groups, or as you talk to different people. So it's very rare for me to do this whole thing where no one has like spoken back to me for a bit. That's also fine. It's like my old life. And this is why. So misunderstandings and confusions cause delays and wasted work. So there's the big thing. Anything where you ask a question and people don't know, it gets really frustrating where it's suddenly found out that there's been this mass miscommunication, or people haven't understood what everyone was going on about, because it was one conversation here, one conversation there. No one brought everything one together. What we do in productions a lot of time is bring the right people together in a room so that actually they can talk through things, because once it's gone through, my audio lead asked me to talk to someone, to ask someone a narrative, to ask someone else, then the Chinese whispers. If I can just get the right people in the room, and that's back to knowing the right people, then actually things can get sorted out really quickly. And yeah, but misunderstandings especially they really frustrate teams and individuals where they think they've been working on the right things and they haven't, and that then takes away time from anything else they might develop in real knock-on effects. But yeah, so getting anything that we can work as production to sort of stop that confusion, or any confusions, that's the goal. And we want to know, like, we have processes in place. We talked a lot. We're doing, like I said, a lot of work in pipeline and processes that are followed. So everyone knows where the structure is, and everyone knows what they should be doing and their role within a process. And we know where there is feedback gathering, that the feedback is listened to. We really have found that makes such a difference, that like the teams and devs, when they know that they're being heard, and then someone's going, I understand what you're talking about, we will look into this. We may not be able to solve things directly or really quickly. It might be part of a bigger thing that production say looking at. But knowing that people are heard and they've got the avenues to talk to people, that's such an important element. But yeah, so like I said, production is about making sure everyone knows what they should be doing for the good of the project, and which is the exciting thing. Everyone wants to make great games. Everyone's making great games, and these really skilled, talented people, and production is within that. Like, everyone needs to know when stuff needs to get done by. People can work and manage their time if they know deadlines and if everything is managed ahead of time. So where problems come is where you go, oh, did I not tell you this needed to be in next week? Or, oh, it just turns out we've heard this and this deadline has changed. Those kind of things cause real frustration. So the more stuff you can plan ahead and the more stuff you can communicate that out. So it might be Outlook calendars, it might be like I said, Confluence pages, things that people can check and they know are up to date. But yeah, you and your teams, you also might not get this right at first. You might have to work out ways to communicate and talk and get methods of communications up. So you might find ways that actually you need to use the tools that you have and work through these. And they might adapt as teams change, as different individuals come and go. They might come in with different skills or with different ideas about communication. They may have different structures in place. They might have bought something from a different studio and, oh, actually, we used to do this and it was fantastic. And those kind of things, again, you have to be adaptable. So your communication skills have to be you have to be able to keep them up to date and keep abreast of new sort of technology that comes through or new structures that people might be working on. And that kind of, or how different teams may want to work. So yeah, you may need to be adaptable. And I think that's the other thing. This is very flexible sort of skills, flexible learning areas. And it's one of the things that you need to keep sort of on top of. So yeah, communication. But that's kind of why it's so important to think about how you communicate and how you're communicating with your teams. So that's sort of why and how. So one of the key elements of this is sort of active listening. So as much as like I said, this is really weird for me that I haven't listened to anyone in ages. But there's a sort of active listening is definitely a skill you can develop. And it's such a key tool for producers. So one of them is paying attention. Like I said, I like to keep my camera on so people know that I'm paying attention, because you can pick up when people are not paying attention. And then, they might be looking at something else. They might have immediately go off on this. And then, sometimes your attention wavers, but if I can keep my attention, people know that I'm paying attention and show that you're listening. So I actually do this. I have notebooks. There's a current notebook. It says a pilot's notebook on it. It's notebook 28 since I started. And I actually jot down every single meeting and some notes, more as like an aid memoir, but also I know that I'm listening. And yeah, it's one of those little things that I do as well to sort of build up. So yeah, physical, old school. In fact, I I have a load of different colored pens. So different meetings, because as I said, I might have 15 meetings in a day. I can break them up in my notebooks. And that is one of the things that I really find useful. Providing feedback. So when someone says, asks you a question, either if it's suitable for you to be answering there and then, sometimes it's like, actually, I want to go away and think about this. That's one of the biggest things I've learned, is that actually it is all right to say, I need some time to process this. I want to think about it, and I will get you a better answer than if you just put me on the spot. It's not being judgmental. And I don't really think, I would hope that isn't something that comes into your day-to-day stuff, but that the people you have around you have been picked because they are, talented people have picked talented people to work with. So everyone knows what they're doing. But yes, it's not being judgmental. And it's, like I said, responding appropriately. So depending on who's talking or how they're talking or what kind of methods are being used, and making sure that you are in line with that, so that you're picking up on not just the content, but the tone and sort of who you're talking. And like I said, we might have different teams. We have parent companies, so we might have work with our publishers in PlayOn, who are over in Hamburg particularly. So yeah, looking at there's cultural elements that come into this as well. So realizing who you're talking to and thinking about how you respond to that, that's really important elements. As I mentioned, non-verbal cues. So we can definitely tell if someone's getting very irate if they've got their camera on, or you can start to tell where someone is getting a bit frustrated because their question hasn't been answered and they've had their little virtual hand raised. And paying attention to those, especially as a producer. And if you're running a meeting or if you're running a scrum, that kind of thing, and you go, oh, actually, who is talking? How are they? Who else is listening? Those kind of things. But yeah, non-verbal cues. It's not, like I said, it's easier if people have their cameras on, but it's not. Even then, if you can just see, you get the sense of people being a bit like in the chat too much or something along those lines. You maybe something you want to pick up. And then, yeah, it's open-ended questions. So it's not just closing people down as well. It's asking things that will help. But that certainly comes into when we do one-to-ones, like not just what are you up to, but how you like, how is everything going, as opposed to tell me what you're just on, and brings that those elements. So it's definitely active listening is a skill, like I said, and the more you do it, the more you think about how you're acting. You don't want to be super conscious all the time, but you want to be showing that you're paying attention and that people know that you are someone who listens and that can talk. But like I said, it's also fine to say, like, I can't give you an answer to this now. I need to find the right information, or I need some time to process it. I need to go find and look at something. And that's one of the big things that I've learned since starting this job. It's very different in my previous role. But yeah, so it can, like I said, take time to work out different communication aspects in a studio and all the different ways that maybe information is communicated out, and how these different methods of communication or these different forums might work in different ways. Your teams need to be able to trust you. They need to know that you have their best interests at heart, especially if you end up sort of being in charge of sort of multiple teams or things. You need to think anything where there might be conflict, you need to think about actually how can you make sure that people know that you care and that you are looking for answers, or you're working balanced. So anyone who's got multiple teams, that kind of stuff. It's worth always remembering, making games, even small games, and this is big games or small games, is incredibly complex, lots of moving parts. And I saw this from the stuff that we did in game jams and in classes, all the way to sort of the work I'm doing now. So lots of people are very invested, but they may be invested in their aspect and not necessarily have a greater knowledge of everything else. There is a lot to take in. There's a lot of different elements, and there's a lot of opportunities for miscommunication. It is perfectly fine to ask questions for more information. I've certainly found myself, say, taking over just temporarily cover while another producer's on holiday, a team that I didn't necessarily know, or I don't venture into more technical areas all that much. I can do, and I might have to ask information about that, or I might have to do my research before I say take on. I work with the audio tech team because I work with the audio team, so I obviously work with the audio tech team, and sometimes that's much more technical than my sort of little brain is used to. And it's all right to ask questions. And when I've sort of vouched this, like, is it okay? They're like, yeah, no, because then we know that you will know the right information, as opposed to you've just got something in your head. So it's always fine to ask questions, find the right people to ask questions for. Sometimes that's, like I said, our production team. We ask questions of each other all the time. And yeah, and then working on those questions or those answers and actually working out what you might need to really fulfill an answer or really unblock someone actually might be quite technical. It might involve a whole load meeting. It might, sometimes you go, oh, of course, it's terrible that I asked this question and it's caused 4 more meetings and a wiki page. You're like, well, at least now we know, and at least that won't, because that'll come up at some other point. And you might have, like I said, processes that need explaining and following, and they may not necessarily make sense in the first instance, but actually, especially if you have, say, new people on the team, how do you onboard people? And if your team know that you listen, and if you listen and you have learned all these things, and onboarding people or bringing people into a different discipline, it can work really easily because you have thought about how you explain processes and things. And like I said, you need to be ready for any feedback that you receive. So if someone said, oh, actually, it'd be really helpful if you worked in this way, it'd be really helpful if our team could do this, you're like, well, I'll see what I can do. Don't necessarily need to promise everything. And you may not be able to deliver on everything that you have been asked, but if you can look and think about how that works in terms of communications, that maybe is quite often people ask for, say, channels on our Mattermost, it's like our Slack variants. And then they don't use them because actually that's not the right tool for how they want to communicate, or they ask for Teams, and then they don't use that because that's not, again, the right way to sort of, they need to communicate that. So it's being flexible and it's working out different ways that you can sort of communicate and can bring everyone together and prove that you do, you have listened and you have sort of learned things. So I know I'm sort of coming a little bit out of time. So I've talked about why communication is important and sort of some of the skills. But yeah, there's fine. And then I've talked about active listening, which again, there's a load of stuff you can go and look further on about active listening. But this final bit of sort of how some of this comes into play, especially with regular check-ins and clear messaging. So of those 43 meetings I mentioned last week, someone asked if I were lonely as a remote worker. I was like, no, never. I'd love to be lonely, it'd be great. But yeah, so a load of those were stand-ups. And these are really key part of sort of communication for teams and things. So they have some different cadences. Obviously, audio meet every, how do they go? So my audio, my narrative teams have like a bigger planning session on Monday, and then they have daily stand-ups throughout the week. Production always have a stand-up. Sometimes I might have other ones that say every couple of weeks, or maybe they're every month, because they don't need them. The teams don't need them quite that often, and maybe that not that much happens on a certain subject to have a weekly or daily sort of stand up on them. Sometimes you might have a daily stand up which has got different topics or different focuses depending on the day of the week. So we certainly have some where it's Tech Wednesday, which I quite like. But these stand ups are like they're the backbone of communication, and where you don't have lots of meetings, then these are often the only times that teams might see each other. They might know what else the rest of the team is working on. And like I said, both my audio and my narrative teams are about 6 or 7 people each, and production's about 14. And production ones are really important to know actually all the different things that might be happening elsewhere on the sort of project or the studio. They're really key to limiting problematic miscommunications. And sometimes you have to take information from one to another. We have ones that say we've got all the leads, or we've, I know directors have ones, and sometimes information feels like it shunters like down and filters down to your sort of dev teams. But they're really important for airing issues and asking questions, and for updating teams. And so from a producer point of view, that's where I kind of do my weekly please update your JIRAs, but also this is what's happening in production, this is where we are here, this is what we're doing. But yeah, they're really important. So these regular check-ins with teams, or like I said, with different variants of teams. Like I said, audio tech has got slightly bigger things. Making sure, what you need to make sure is that everyone knows ahead of time what the point of that meeting is. So who's in it? Why are they in it? What is going to be discussed? And they may not necessarily always fill the whole time. Quite often we give time back to people. And it gives them a chance to stretch and have a cup of tea, or go and do something else for a few minutes before their next meeting. But they're really important that people, so they have to be named well, they have to make sense. It can't just be too vague. People need to know what sort of the meetings are. And like I said, if you're looking at a calendar which has got 43 meetings on it, you need to know what you're doing. So you need to be able to think about how you title them. If you've got any agenda information that's going to be in the body of the text, or this is anything that needs to be read ahead of time, you need to give people time to do that as well. And then, like I said, I line manage, and I love line managing. So I have regular one-to-ones with my team. And they was, like I said, part social catch-up, part, how you doing, anything else you need to know of, but also this is what's coming ahead. This is the stuff that would be really good for you to be looking at. I have one-to-ones with my directors. So that's like, how do we plan out audio or narrative, and what do we need to be thinking of? Bigger picture stuff. I'm in on progress reviews. That would be our executive producer will take the directors, put people into boxes. Our executive producer will take the directors and myself and any other relevant producers. I might be part of scrums that kind of fit in and as a co-run a few things with people, and that's a really good way of making sure that you yourself as a producer is not overwhelmed if you can co-run, and then you have then separate communications with the people you're co-running things with. So that's kind of those regular check-ins, but that also means you've got that cadence, you've got that communication things, and that's really sort of key. But yeah, so one of the first things I learned was not to waffle in communications. And that was a really interesting thing. The first thing was, in academia, things were much less concise. Things were a lot sort of fluffier. And I kind of got to game dev, and I realized that needed to be very direct how I talk to people. I needed to make sure what I was saying was right, so I could take time out to make sure that I had the right stuff, but and I could check things. But actually, you want to make one message, and this is particularly if you're doing entertainment committee stuff, one message that goes out with the right links, and you might spend a bit of time checking the links, or if you've got an email that's sent out, all this kind of stuff. You have to remember that people are busy, and that teams are busy. So the less confusion you can bring in what I refer to as the development ecosystem, the better. So you want to be really concise. So if someone asks for dates, go away and find the dates for something. When does this bit finish? When does this need to be done by? Don't just go, oh, I think it is. Actually go, if you don't know, go and find out. I'll get back to you with those dates, and those dates should be final. It's fine to go and check something. It is much better than, like I said, bringing in any confusion. And this is exactly, if you're dealing with external people, and I used to do a lot more with the marketing and PR briefs. If you're dealing with external people, I used to end up saying things like, I'm sure that'll be fine, knowing it would be fine. And then they go, oh, well, we didn't action it, so we weren't sure. It was like, oh, okay. So realizing that, no, I need to be really clear. Yes, we can do this. No, we can't. Not by that date. Yes, by that date, that kind of stuff. Be super clear. Have it written out. Take a few minutes to write it out. Use whatever system you're writing, get it. So rubbish at spam dyslexic. So like write it in Word first, so it's picked up all your spelling mistakes. And what I don't do is just fire off things really quickly. I quite often take a breath, work out how I'm going to write, what I'm going to write. And yeah, so checking your messaging is a really important element. And I think that's one of the biggest skills and one of the biggest takeaways that you can have is actually how you can be clear and concise, and how much difference it makes than someone who is just a bit waffly. Do not be the waffly person. I mean, waffles are great, but they're for breakfast, not for like the workplace. And yeah, so tools are super important. Like I said, we're hybrid remote. And also in studio. So we have a mix of people, and also a mix of people changes. So some people may live close to Nottingham. They might go into the studio a few days a week and also spend some time at home. They might be further afield. They might be in studio for a week and then go away again. So we use a whole load of different tools for this. Mattermost is sort of our quick chat element. Teams is for all of our presenting, all our meetings. We use Confluence for wiki pages. We have Jira for tasking, but there's also a big communication element that happens in this, because you might have people updating and going, we did this and this is happening and this, I had a typo in Miro, but it should be Miro boards. We'll fix that. But yeah, so Miro boards is a much better idea. I have a loot. But yeah, Miro boards, there's a lot of that information, a lot of visual stuff. We've taken to using those quite a lot. And then email. I forget about email as a communication thing. And some people like operations like to use Teams, so some things vary between using different elements. But yeah, they've different forms of communication, and we spend a lot of time in production working out the best way and the best tools to use for whatever we need to communicate at a certain time. So does it have lots of images that we're going to need to use? Do we need to collect lots of things? Does it need to have external partners to just us? So making sure we're using them in the most efficient ways and that gel with your teams. And they may have conventions that have worked around them. They may have specific ways they use them. Lots of conversations about whether we should have just say a social channel as well as a work channel, but then you split them up. And yeah, you can tell I'm getting tired. This is my most typo thing. So yeah, and then how decisions are communicated out, and permanent information. And I will change those typos because it just annoyed me. It can be a lot to keep track of, and that's another thing that's worth thinking. Is a lot of sort of bits and pieces to sort of fix and know about. So I know I'm coming to the end of my time. I want to thank you for listening actively, one hopes. Maybe you have feedback. Maybe you've been thinking, I don't know, yeah. It's definitely the bit to go away and sort of look into ways that you can practice that. But thank you for listening. It has been an absolute delight. And yeah, so do connect with me. I'm on Blue Sky and LinkedIn and other things, but those are the cool ones these days. Who knew LinkedIn would get cool? Well, maybe it isn't. And if you have any questions, then yeah, do please in the chat or whatever, find me afterwards.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you. Thank you very much for all of that. I'm a big fan of your bee. I'm a big fan of your bee communicator. As it kind of doubles down on a lot of the slides and sort of drives home the point, which is I don't know. Is that a pun because bees have
Yeah.
point? I don't know. I got slightly distracted because I had to start making D&D jokes about the Miro Bard.
Yeah, it's in my head now. That's what I've got. I'm going to have to make those. It's
Yeah,
nice
yeah.
seeing some of my students in the chat as well. I see former students.
Oh, fantastico. Well, hello, students. I can see some familiar names from our Intergames community as well. I've jumped over to this just because it's easy for the Q&A, but if anyone's missing information from the slide, I can just bring it back up if anyone wants to
Yeah.
hunt you down on LinkedIn or the
Yes.
Blue Skies. I think you're one of the first people to present a slide that ends with a blue sky like
Hey,
handle or
like
invitation.
social media makes me very happy. And
Yeah.
I'm so old that I've seen so many changes in social media. I had an AOL account, people, when I was like 13. So I love social media. I've seen it as a development. And I used to teach a lot about social media and Twitter and things. And I have a diploma in social media. I think it's fascinating as methods of communication and how it's adapted. So yeah, I'm that cool person.
Nice. No, I'm just happy to have 2015's Twitter back essentially.
For now, it's
Um,
great.
somewhere that I can make noise that isn't my Instagram story because I do it's a different type of
Yeah.
it's a different brain
I'm too
flow.
old for video. That's what I've learned. Can't do.
Fair.
Yeah.
Anyways, we're going completely off kilter, so we've only got a few minutes left for Q&A. So
Someone asked about stand-ups, and I think that's the big question I can see is that so a stand-up that is
stand-ups.
thanks stand-up. So I forgot. Yeah, that's a great question. So that is there's a meeting at the start of every day, typically where everyone once upon a time would have stood up physically in the studio in a little huddle and they'd say what they were going to do during the day. Now, when I did my Scrum Master training, they also talked about ones at the end of the day where you said what you'd done. But I have never seen those. I think people are just like, I'm too tired. I can't do this anymore. So a stand-up is that where you sort of, and they may be only 10, 15 minutes, but I get, so my narrative team and my audio team, and everyone goes around and says what they're working on or what they're blocked on. And you can depart information to go, please sign up for the Christmas cookie competition or what have you. And, the Christmas party is this week, but also we are end of phase and all these kind of things. So it's production's chance to know what people are doing and where they might have things they might fix up. So it's a little sort of ritual and they're fantastic. Everyone should do it. I could get my entire household to do one every morning. It'd be amazing. It's like, I'm going to go to school. I'm going to go do this. And yeah, but they are really useful. So they're these tiny little meetings, like I said, no more than 15 minutes. I've only ever physically done two. I've physically had people in the studio to stand up because everything is sort of remote. So yeah, but I mean, you might bring up the Jira thing, you might go through people's tasks, you might bring up a calendar, you might have other information that helps, but they're usually just chances for people to check in what they're doing, what they're planning to do that day or that week, or what they've been working on or what they might want to showcase. So
Nice. Yeah, no, Dan Tonkin asked the question. Thank you, Dan, for the question. It's a good bit of info. I enjoy stand-ups. I like chatting with people.
yeah,
But I also like respecting people's time and like productivity efforts. Like no one wants to be in a 1 hour meeting when they are busy.
yeah.
But everyone benefits from knowing how busy you are in a 10-minute stand-up. Everyone it's a good middle ground.
What have we got? Oh, actual questions.
Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll bring them up on the screen as we
Okay.
talk about them. So Dan Tonkin, yeah, in fact this is a question that I was going to ask if no one else did ask it as well on behalf of our audience, but Dan has asked it. So if you're a developer, you need a portfolio to be hired in games, but if you're going into production, what gets you hired if you have no game experience?
So
what does that portfolio look like?
Big things I would say is games jams as producers as game jams, and lots of the students I had that got jobs as associate producer and stuff was because they had basically run games jams successfully, like projects in game jams. So actually game jams do work very well if you have someone who's giving out the tasks. It's not always possible and sometimes you have to double up, but if you can get that role. Group projects, so again we used to do a lot of stuff with having producers and sort of scrum masters running group projects at universities or in other sort of walks of life. So if you can prove that you have managed people, event running is a particularly useful one. So that's a fantastic, because if you've dealt with an event, any kind of event, and that can be conferences, that can be tournaments, anything where you've dealt with people are the trickiest and best bit of game development, but also they're the bit that are most, like, obviously systems and stuff just kind of work when they're working. If you can prove that you have worked with people, then that's the kind of production skills that we're kind of really looking for. An understanding of sort of projects and pipelines. But obviously that's going to differ in what access people have to that. I didn't really have a chance to do anything in this until I got to university and group projects and things like that. I've since obviously done loads of stuff with games jams. I think that is a really key element. I know they're not for everyone, and I know it doesn't have to be like the 48 hours sleeping in a lab type ones across the board, but looking at how if you can get across that you understand projects and what part you had in projects in your portfolio, as opposed to we made that game. Well, tell us how you managed those people. Tell us how you got that game made. Tell us how you did that elements. Like, did you use a Trello board? Trello is great, by the way, as a sort of in element. So Trello is the sort of Kanban-esque digital post-it notes where you can things. How did you manage it? How did you get all the asset lists? How did you get people to make what the game designer had in their head? And sometimes people double up, and you see this quite a lot. Oh, I'm the designer and producer, and that's also great. But outlining the bits which was production, that's the key thing you're sort of looking at in your portfolio. It may not be as bright and shiny as other people's, but actually what we need to see is that you've understood things. And then yes, if you have access to Jira or we used to use Handsoft, if you have any sort of task management stuff. But even if, like I said, Trello boards, Excel spreadsheets, anything that, and then like I said, every producer I know has like a producer origin story where they're like, oh, I realized I was a producer when this happened, and I used to collect the trolls with the weird hair, and I used to make databases for them as a child. I play The Sims because I like to give people tasks in a meaningful manner that they can do in timely fashions. When you talk to producers, like, I do this, be like, yeah. So also think about what it is that makes you want to be the person who interacts with people to give them tasks, and explain how you've given people those tasks and what they did. So.
Nice. Thank you very much. And yeah, agree with a lot of that. Within Into Games, we're big champions of game jams. Like, we recognize the impact and skill that it has. Like, in a single weekend, yes, you might listen to an audiobook. Yes, you might do some research or like follow someone's blog posts. But if you make a game on the regularly, like, once a month or once every couple of months, the amount of progress that you'll have in that given amount of time will just be astronomical compared to a lot of the passive learning you could be doing. So just chip away at them. Just try, once in a while. And there are game jams that last over a month, so you don't have to.
And that's a bigger task. Like, you can get something done in a weekend, but if you can keep people motivated over a month, that's a much bigger proof of your production sort of skills. Then that's a really good show.
Absolutely, 100%. I'm going to move on to another question here. So NJ Boyd has asked a little bit more about sort of the entry points for production. So the question: is there an external entry point into production roles? Most appear to be internal roles, changing or hiring experience and published producers as entry or junior.
No, Okay, so there is a thing. There is definitely elements where we may, as junior roles, initially put stuff out internally. That's definitely a thing, and usually our QA pool might apply, but we also have 100% been looking externally in the past for production. And again, what we're looking for people who have got that sort of mindset of processes, of people, of pipelines, and production. Let's call it the 4 Ps. Oh, let's not. But yeah, that's how people, it is still that, and it is that same mindset. Like, are you coming across as someone who, what they've chosen to do or what they want to sort of do is think about processes and sort of pipelines or are you talking too much about I'm an artist who also quite likes a spreadsheet? Well, that's a very different thing from there. But yeah, there's definitely, I see associate producer roles, project management is an interesting. We have a project management team as well, so there's definitely crossing across from, say, project management, they run the sort of systems behind that. They're the people who unblock producers. So our project management team runs behind the production team. There's definitely, I've seen associate project managers teams, and then I've seen those people go off into associate producer roles as well, because they've then got the data management and the skills in using stuff like Jira and Handsoft, but then also the people skills elsewhere. And yeah, publisher producers, again, that's sort of separate, where you're maybe looking at lots of different games. It's one of the fields, I think, that is different in every different studio, depending on the studio makeup and how that is put together. So I think it's always worth interrogating the roles that you see and what will actually be required, and then needing to be slightly more flexible. But yeah, we do, sometimes it's internal, but predominantly we're looking at external hires when we do. It's not rare, not often that we actually have production openings at all, because we're happy and we're cool.
Yeah, I think like the trick that I've just had is look for the words associate producer. Just look,
Yeah,
keep an eye on that term, and while there won't be hundreds, there will be dozens. Like there will
yeah.
be. They're not necessarily all accessible. They're not necessarily all as entry level as you'd like, but a few of them are worth poking.
I saw someone, there was another question about certifications.
Yeah. Oh, it's just above this one. As a
Yeah, I think
producer,
that's a
what?
really interesting one. So I was a Scrum Master. I did do Scrum Master training. Um, and that has come into play, but I don't think there has been a certificate that I've looked at, particularly that has sort of, we've always looked towards. Definitely nothing we've been like, well, they've done that. They've definitely done things. There are, however, data management. In fact, marketing stuff is weirdly useful, but yeah, that sort of anything with sort of data management, anything with communication skills. We've seen a lot of LinkedIn learning stuff. So if you are at college, university, and have access to those, you're looking at the more boring is the wrong way, but the slightly less exciting, say, Microsoft certifications. So things like Excel. If you are an Excel whiz, then if you can find a certificate that proves that, that's really useful, because you will be spending a lot of time with a spreadsheet. Miro Academy have got stuff. So if you have access to Miro, there's a bunch of Miro Academy training things. But yeah, so this, have a think about the tools that you would use to communicate words and data, and think about any certificates you can find in that. That's really sort of, that would be my key elements.
Brilliant stuff. Now, quick question for you, Nia, before we move on or
Mhm.
do anything. How are you doing for time? Do you want
I'm
one more
fine.
question? Do
Yeah,
you?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Because you definitely got a few more. But there's one that's really interesting here as well, because I moved from academia to the games industry as well. And
Well
Noah
worn
the
path at the
Flying
moment. Yeah.
Fox. Noah the Flying Fox has asked a question on that subject. What was your biggest challenge departing from academia into production, and how did you overcome it?
So the biggest one was, so academia is actually, it's big on crunch culture, and it won't talk about it in the same way, but it is. So the biggest issue I had was I realized I was still working when everyone else in the studio had gone off, because I was used to working far later.
Mm.
So that was one big thing, was I had to adjust what I did for time, and I suddenly had evenings and weekends. That was quite exciting. But the other thing was, the biggest thing was that communication thing. Was I went from having waffly 4-hour meetings to 15 minutes. You've got to get everything across. So I had to learn that it was okay to go and ask or take a break to get the right information, but being able to concisely communicate, that was the biggest thing I had to learn, and be very direct. And that, it took me a little time, and I'm still, I think if I'm tired, I get a bit more waffly, and I try not to. So that's definitely the biggest thing. Was I went from something which was just big, big flowy meetings where people would get very angry and people would just talk, and or you'd be delivering things all the time, but you wouldn't really get any feedback. To actually, I'm going into something where I get feedback quite a lot, and I have to deal with things. That's fine, but actually, it can't. It's got to be direct. I think that was the biggest thing that I found. But everything else has been a really nice change. So, and production was always what I wanted to do when I sort of left my masters however many moons ago. So
I relate to the comms thing quite a lot as well. I just found like people in academia, despite the quick turnaround they have for their personal problem, like I want my problem solved yesterday, they will on the day to day. Nothing happens quickly.
yeah,
Nothing needs to happen. Like nothing's got urgency if it's not their immediate problem. And so stuff would just take forever. In different waves of urgencies and things like that. And in games, actually everything's quite fast moving, but at a very fair and obvious way.
yes, which makes a big difference.
Yeah, exactly. So you know that stuff's going to move on. All right, I think I've got one last question here, just from scanning the chat, from who's given me how to pronounce their name, Beastie Belzer. Beastie Belzer would like to ask. So if it starts off by saying thanks a lot, very educational, and demystifying. My question is the classic: how do I apply for that job? Now they do go on to talk a lot about their experience,
Yeah,
but I think really the crux of this
it's
is I have a
all of
lot
that.
of soft skills, I have a lot of experience, but it's not coming across in the application stage. Like,
So
help.
it is crystallizing how you have organized things. And I used to, when I was at university, I was chair of our role playing society. After that, when I
Oh,
was,
sweet.
yeah, because I'm cool. Um, and it was the biggest role playing society. It's a massive one. When I was a student. And also, I used to run a board game club in Birmingham that's still going. All of those things, where you were talking about how you have managed things and how you have got things to exist, those are really big skills. And I think they're really easy that you forget how important they are, because basically the world is full of some people who do things and get on and do things and organize stuff, and then everyone else who goes, oh, that there was something for me to go to. Like the people, if you can crystallize those skills, I organize these people, I booked this place, this has been running successfully for 3 months, 4 months, 3 years, whatever. If you can manage to somehow like boil down the information that you have and to have it clear, like you were looking at production is about managing people, it is about managing people's time, it is about managing um, their expectations around that, then all of that. So yeah, it's um, it's just really boiling down those elements. It's not being confused. What we often see is people going like, oh, and I'm also a writer and something else. Those are different skill sets. So really boiling down the ones that are to do with managing people, managing their time, and getting projects completed. And the more projects that you can complete or showcase that you completed, fantastic. If you're looking at sort of community management, then like I said, you're looking at the different kind of tools and stuff that you could be working on. I'm always happy to pick up on this sort of, if someone's dropped me a line on LinkedIn, I kind of love helping people find their ways. So I'm very, very happy to help with anyone who, like I said, does. But yeah, it's breaking it down. It's been really clear.
Beautiful stuff. Thank you very much. I learnt this the hard way when I started organising my own birthday parties with Luma pages and assets and parking information and catering information and ways to communicate with me with questions, but also turning it into an FAQ because I realised people are asking me the same 3 questions. The information's not clear. You got to tell everyone, and it's so silly how actually like that's not professional experience, is it? And actually, in the right context, it
Yeah.
totally is. Like it is totally a skill set that.
Event planning is such a big thing. We often talk about wedding planning to producer as a timeline, but yeah,
Mm.
anything where you've got like a big party or a big event, then yeah. But the producers are the people who are there in the midst of stuff and managing a
Even just
tombola stall as well as drinks tokens.
even just getting your bloody friends to go to the cinema and have a drink afterwards, like
Yeah.
consider it experience. Brilliant stuff. I think that brings us to the end of this particular conversation on
Mm-hmm.
effective communication strategies for game development. First off, a huge thank you to all of you in the audience. Thank you for all your questions. Thank you for chatting. Thanks for being engaged and just generally being digitally cool people. And if you're watching this in the future, thanks for being cool in the future as well. Do they still say cool, or have we got some new vernacular that I don't know? I'll never know. Thank you, Nia, for joining us on the platform.
Absolute
Thanks for
pleasure.
chatting with us. Thanks for sharing all of that. Some really amazing stuff in there. A lot of it's really confirming for me. I just find it personally like these are a lot of my strengths and skill sets, but you've found a way to capture like how to verbalize them or how to present them or how to
Hopefully.
kind of think about them in a new context in a way that I take for granted sometimes. So genuinely in love with that, and I can see that people in chat as well found this really, really, really useful. What I will say is if you've got follow-up questions, I won't take them now just because of time, but into games community, jump
Yeah.
into the Discord, ask your question there. There's a really good channel called Ask the Community, which includes thousands of different industry professionals and people who know this stuff. So jump in there and you will absolutely get a positive
Yeah.
answer, I promise you. Um, that is it for now. It is a Wednesday afternoon, so everyone have a good midweek. We're coming back on this YouTube channel tomorrow to talk about narrative design, in particular, writing for indie projects. So, how we've talked about game jams today, we're going to talk about that from a writing angle tomorrow, and how you can turn small bits of writing into a career of writing, particularly in games, but other just creative projects, because ultimately it's a very squiggly career path, that one. So come check that out. That's going to be with Mark Gibney tomorrow around the same time, 1 p.m. start UK. That's all for now. Thanks very much. Look after yourselves, everyone.
Have a great week, everyone.
Yeah. Bye bye, everyone. The stream will end any second.